I'm Blake.
And I'm Jared. We're the Night Terrors in 1927.
And you're watching Spin It Reviews. Spin it!
And cut!
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Spin It Reviews, and this is the third YouTube episode of Underground Corner. Now, for those who don't know, Underground Corner is basically where I take a look at 3 albums by artists that are a bit more under the radar. My personal cutoff at the moment is around 25,000 to 30,000 likes on the Facebook page, and recommend them to you because I feel like they could use a little more exposure. So without any further ado, let's jump right into this, starting with Unorthodox by Jake Lambo. Now, I actually found out about this up-and-coming rapper through him being on B.o.B's label, No Genre. And now an interesting thing about this is that B.o.B, as some of you guys might know, is an artist I've sort of fallen out of favor with over the last couple years. However, easily one of the best moments on his otherwise very disappointing No Genre 2 mixtape from last year was The Nation, featuring Jake Lambo, who at just age 16 at the time, dropped easily one of the most compelling verses on that whole album. Then back in January, the label No Genre came out with a compilation featuring all of its artists, which, as you might expect, was a bit of a mixed bag, and frankly, a little too boring for me to have been able to dedicate a full video to here. Most of the rappers were fine, I guess, but really the only 3 to stand out to me in any clear way were B.o.B for obvious reason, Lindsay for basically being the only girl in the group, and again, Jake Lambo, who consistently showed a good amount of personality, wittier punchlines, more coherent flows and cohesive themes, albeit with the occasional dip into Bobby Ray's typical pitfalls lately. So I figured I'd keep an eye on this kid to see what he'll come out with next on his own, and now we have a new mixtape called Unorthodox. And to be perfectly blunt, this is more consistently good than anything B.o.B's done, at least since Strange Clouds, mostly because Jake, on a good majority of this thing, actually sounds inspired. I know, crazy, right? A lot of it, as you might expect from a young up-and-coming rapper, is about wanting to rise to the top of the rap game from life in the ghetto, deflecting anyone objecting to it or anyone in it for the wrong reasons. Like I hinted at earlier, on a technical level, Jake actually does a pretty good job with most of these tracks, and I can really appreciate that he's not falling into those modern-day trappings, like trying to start some dumb cultural catchphrase to soundtrack Vine videos, but by actually writing some solid bars with a decent amount of thought behind them. Tracks like Always Knew and My City and Made for This, and a few others, are definitely the songs to root for in terms of potential radio play down the road. They've got actually kind of a similar appeal to them as some of B.o.B's best songs, with the poppy piano-driven beats, great choruses, and charmingly and believably confident lyrics, which in the case of My City includes probably the 3rd best Family Matters reference I've ever heard in a rap song. Though my favorite song here is probably Empty, which has this great minimalist sound to it, driven by a palm-muted guitar and these eerie backing vocals. Admittedly, I wish the verses would have matched up a little more with the melancholy tone of the chorus, but it's still a pretty interesting track. At some point, Jake is basically disavowing people just hanging out with him to potentially ride on his coattails. In fact, this idea of rising in the ranks of the rap game through actual integrity instead of any kind of dirty tricks is a recurring thing across this mixtape, and really helps Jake appear a lot more likable in a lot of these songs. Flexin actually tackles similar stuff, but is a standout from just how wonderfully unstable it is between the erratic beat and Jake throwing a lot more emotion into his voice than usual, while just going in on the whole thing, for lack of a better term. It's one of the more entertaining songs here for sure, in a great way. Tell It is another one of the more straightforwardly enjoyable songs on this thing, and on this song he's basically calling out people who brag about living this hard, rich lifestyle on social media and even in real life that they don't actually have. It's the kind of takedown that you'd think would be a little condescending, but he actually pulls off really well from how kinda charmingly cocky and sarcastic he is over the course of this thing. Meanwhile, on the complete opposite side of the spectrum, while Somebody Loves You isn't the most groundbreaking empowerment anthem in the world, it's still sincere sounding enough to work. Same applies for the stripped down and frankly beautiful closer Regrets, which recounts the death of his grandpa and best friend, and just lamenting over the fact that he just didn't spend enough time with them. And while I personally haven't really experienced anything directly related to this kind of thing, I can really see it connecting with people. Now, Unorthodox is by no means perfect. There is a moment here and there, including on the opening track, unfortunately, where he does kind of fall into those rap cliches, and a lot of the songs tend to end a little too abruptly, and even my favorite tracks here do kind of have a weak or cringe-worthy line here and there. But in general, Jake shows a ton of potential on this mixtape, and I really can't wait to see what he does next. Next up is the debut album from Night Terrors in 1927, called Everything's Coming Up Roses. Now, both the guys in this duo have pretty seasoned resumes in now defunct 2000s bands, most notably Blake Sennett being the lead guitarist in Rilo Kiley. I've actually seen these guys live twice. In fact, I've actually covered them in 2 of my most recent concert reviews. The first time was back in November when I saw them opening for Capital Cities, which is how I kind of got introduced to them. And then just a few weeks ago, I saw them opening for Bleachers, which is actually where I got that cool little intro part from. Again, thanks guys, really appreciate that. I mentioned this right off the bat because if I had to make any 2 modern day comparisons when it comes to Night Terror's sound, those would probably be it. Now, 80s revivalism, or any direct revivalism for that matter, is a very tough thing to pull off, because it can be easy to just come off cheesy, or just coast on nostalgia without the good songwriting to back it up. But acts like Night Terrors, in addition to the 2 I mentioned earlier, have this almost immaculate quality to how they craft these instant classic pop gems. Like, I listened to a song like When You Were Mine, their breakout hit with Tegan and Sara, or Dust and Bones, their other big single, and I just think, how has this song never been written before until now? Like, even songs here that aren't in my top 5 still get stuck in my head from time to time. All across this thing, you'll find these great anthemic choruses, tight instrumentation with very sharp melodies, and Jared Gorbel's very emotive vocals that add a whole other layer of epicness to the equation. And it kind of helps pull off some moments that might otherwise be a little too over the top for their own good. Take Fire with Fire, for example. I listened to the song, and I'm just imagining some video for it where, like, once the huge drums and vocal melodies come in the chorus, Jared's on this giant elevated circular platform, wind machines going full blast, he's looking at and clenching his fists with each line in the chorus, woven in with clips from the dramatic action movie this is inevitably going to be soundtracking. However, that's not to say they can't reel things back to earth with more quirky, modern, indie pop leaning stuff. Like, I'm getting a real early fun vibe from the song It Would Be an Honor, and Running in Place is something that I could actually kind of picture a band like Group Love or Youngblood Hawk doing if they went for a more electronic leaning approach. Now, in both of the concert reviews I've talked about this band in, I have mentioned the resemblance that Jared has vocally to Brandon Flowers from The Killers, and that influence isn't any more apparent than on the song Always Be One, which in my opinion could have been a standout highlight from any one of The Killers' albums. 2 more songs I want to mention are Perfect Day, another endlessly likable pop rock song, which I'm having a little more trouble narrowing down comparisons to, aside from maybe a more optimistic Bad Sons, and the title track, which closed the album on a definitely more dark and brooding note, but without losing the memorability that the rest of the album had. As for lyrics, with a couple exceptions here and there, they do really just tackle the typical subject matter of relationships, both good and bad ones, but at the same time, they do manage to hit this really cool balance where, like, it is very broadly sketched in general a lot of the time, but at the same time, they don't really use many cliche lines that would make the average listener roll their eyes. Overall, Everything's Coming Up Roses is a really impressive debut from an act that's got the best of classic and some current synth-pop songcraft down to a science. Plus, it's like $6 on iTunes, so I mean, how can you go wrong there? And the last album we'll be talking about today is Default by the band Cascading Elephants. Now, these guys actually contacted me a few months ago asking me to talk about this album on the channel, which I'm always happy to do, especially given a very unknown band like that, like I said in the intro, could use whatever little exposure I can give them. Anyway, this band has a very unique sound to it. There's some elements of 80s new wave, modern day electronica, a bit of an indie rock spin to some of it, which is nice given that since about half this album is instrumental, it's good to have that kind of variety in instrumentation to mix things up and keep things interesting. There are instances of these great classic rock style guitar and drum solos on some of the jammier tracks here, like Collision and Water. Then there are these pretty electronic synth sequences that coat the background on some of these songs in a real cool way, like on the opener, Universal Reversal, as well as the 7-minute standout track, The Island, which paints this great moody atmosphere in a way that actually kind of reminds me of the 21 Pilots song, Ode to Sleep, and anyone that knows me knows that's quite the high comparison to make. Then you got tracks like Lines and Stay With Me and Bean Song, where they go for more of a pop sensibility and pull that off well too. Stay With Me is probably the best of the ones in this vein, in my opinion, opting for more of a driving electropop sound, which is some pretty good effect. But on the other side of things, the more organic moments are worth pointing out too, like the closer It's Raining, and especially the soaring guitar solo that goes on for over half of its 5.5-minute length. Now, my only real gripe with the album, which is really more a disclaimer than anything else, is that it's not exactly the most top-of-the-line production out there. Sonically, it can feel a little amateur, which I guess is fair for a band with about 300 likes on Facebook. Some of the mixing is a bit off. There are some vocal effects thrown in that don't really belong. A couple forced rhymes. The vocals are a little limited in terms of the range. And the album as a whole has a certain lo-fi feel to it that, again, doesn't always fit. But personally, I find this really easy to overlook, mostly because, for the most part, the songs themselves do manage to shine through despite these little technical limitations. Besides, if low budgets were deal breakers for unknown acts, I would never even release my music. So yeah, I'd recommend checking this thing out and supporting these guys. Again, not the most immaculate recording in the world, but there's a lot of talent and good songwriting put on display here, and I'm very interested in seeing what Cascading Elephants has to do next. So yeah, those are another 3 lesser-known acts that I think you guys should all check out, that I highly recommend. All their information, including Facebook pages and band camps and stuff like that, are in the description for you guys to check out, which again, I do recommend. Oh, and one more band I gotta recommend is the one on my shirt here, Paper Days. They're fronted by a good buddy of mine, Nico. They just put out an EP last year that was really good. Basically, if you like, your breezy indie rock, kind of catchy, they're great live. They just put out a new single called Creature that's probably their best song to date. The video for that and all their other information is linked in the description. And, I might actually do an interview with them when they drop their full-length album. Who knows? So, yeah, going back to outro stuff, share this around with anyone who might be interested. Like the Facebook page in the description for updates, commentaries, and music news and reviews of albums I don't get around to here. If any of the bands I talked about here shared this, then I am very appreciative. I hope anyone linked here will check out my other stuff. And, yeah, hopefully I'll see you in the next episode of Spin It Reviews.